The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
This week on Garden Connections, if you are wondering what to do about those unwanted weeds in your yard or garden, join us. We are talking about invasive plant species. Is your green thumb ready? Stay with us. You're watching Garden Connections. Welcome to Garden Connections. I'm Amy Whitaker. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to introduce Laura Van Riper, and she is here to talk with us about invasive plants. Call in and pose your question. So Laura, when we are talking about invasive plants, what is the meaning of invasive?
Yeah, so at the Minnesota DNR, our definition of invasive is we're talking about non-native plants. So plants that weren't in Minnesota at the time of European arrival and that have since come here. And to be invasive, they have to be not just non-native, but they have to have impacts, either economic impacts, environmental impacts, or impacts to human health. So not everything that's non-native is invasive. And it's not really the same thing as a weed, because a weed is just anything you don't want where you have it. So that's our definition of invasive species.
And what makes a plant invasive, or how does it become invasive?
Yeah, a lot of plants are invasive in North America because they came from another continent. And when they came here, they left behind the pathogens, the insects, the things that kept their population in check. And then they come here and they don't have any of those natural enemies, and so they're able to outcompete a lot of our native species. So often invasive plants can form dense stands, dense monocultures, push out the other species that are there.
And what is the most common way that these plants have come to be in our areas?
Yeah. It really varies from plant to plant. Some of them came over accidentally with other plants or soils or crops in the past, and then were arrived on our shores and spread from there. Other species we've purposefully planted all around, and then they've escaped from the places that we've planted. So it can really be a variety of reasons. And invasive species can really have some strong negative impacts. So, I mentioned economic impacts. A lot of species that invade rangelands, like leafy spurge and thistles, those can really have negative economic impacts because you can't graze as many cattle on lands that have been invaded. Things like the emerald ash borer, big negative impact as it kills ash trees. Environmental impacts can be really strong too, so plants like buckthorns and garlic mustards, they have big impacts on the environment. So they come in, form these dense stands, push out native species, and really make it hard for those species to grow. And then also it's hard on the native insects and wildlife that depend on the native species. They're also affected.
And so when a plant becomes deemed invasive, what types of restrictions are put on those plants?
Yeah, so there's lots of there's different lists by different people. So to make things simple, there are some plants that cause so much trouble that they're deemed noxious weeds. So they're actually a noxious weed law, and if you have some of those species, you are required by law to try to control them. And so some of those species, those are things like purple loosestrife, garlic mustard, leafy spurge, perennial sow thistle, and Canada thistle, and a few other thistles. Those you are prohibited from having those plants. And then there's also another category of noxious weeds called restricted noxious weeds. And those are weeds that are so widespread that asking people to control them is really unreasonable. It's gotten so big. But the only feasible means of control is to prohibit the importation, sale, and transportation of them. So those are species like common buckthorn, which used to be sold and planted, and glossy buckthorn, which also has a few different cultivars. And so glossy buckthorn and all its cultivars are prohibited from being sold or transported in Minnesota, along with common buckthorn. And then there's even a third noxious weed category, and those are called secondary noxious weeds. And individual counties can pick from that list, and if there's a particular weed that's an issue in their county, they can decide that this weed is a noxious weed just in their county, even if it's not in the state as a whole. And so some things that people might be familiar with are things like wild carrot, oxeye daisy, orange hawkweed, tansy. Those are all species that are on the secondary noxious weed list, and counties can choose whether or not they want to enforce the control of those. So we've got the plants that are legally noxious weeds you must control. And then there's also another group of plants that cause a lot of impacts to our natural areas but aren't on the noxious weed list. And I brought a little poster here that the DNR has made about stopping the spread and transport of invasive plants. And it's got some examples of those. So Japanese knotweed is one that just covers riversides and forms really dense cover there. So that's one that we have to do a lot of work to control. And see, we've got spotted knapweed, Canada thistle, garlic mustard, as I mentioned before, common tansy, Queen Anne's lace, musk thistle, wild parsnip, leafy spurge, and a plumeless thistle. And also on the DNR website, we have a list of plants that are invasive in natural areas. And so those are ones that at the DNR, in the natural areas we have to manage for those species and try to control their populations. And those would be ones that we would encourage people to try to control if they have those on their lands, especially if they are adjacent to a natural area where the plants could potentially spread out.
So what type of communication might we get from our local governments if, say, you have a meadow or something that has a noxious weed in it?
Yeah, so the Department of Agriculture has county weed inspectors.
Okay.
And it is up to them to enforce the noxious weed laws. So they're the ones who, if they notice something's a problem, they're the ones that will get in contact with you and talk to you about ways you could try to control it.
And do you know if often the community helps watch for these? Like somebody may say, hey, my neighbor has these weeds and they're kind of creeping into my area. Do you find that that happens pretty often?
I'm sure it does, yeah. Yeah.
And so if we're talking noxious weeds for our area here in southeast Minnesota, what are some of the plants we might be looking for in our area?
Yeah, so the thistles are pretty common everywhere. It seems like the big species, which isn't an official noxious weed, but is one that in southern Minnesota is a big issue, is wild parsnip. And there was push, I think last year and the year before, there were several articles that came out about that one. And that's a really tricky one because that's an invasive species that has human health impacts. It has sap that if you get the sap on your skin and then your skin is exposed to sunlight, it can make a pretty severe burn. Okay. So you have to be very careful with that one. And so that's an important one.
I know, I've
to
seen
know because it's all along the roadside.
Yeah, I've seen notices of it in state parks too. I often go to state parks throughout the summer, and you know, for all the hikers and stuff, they've got all the bulletins up about wild parsnip. If you see it along the trail, stay away from it.
Yeah. Especially if you're out walking in shorts or something, you don't want to be brushing up against.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be painful.
Yes.
And what other ones might we be watching for?
Well, so definitely garlic mustard and buckthorn. And so as we mentioned, garlic mustard is on the prohibited noxious weed list where you have to control it. And buckthorn is a restricted noxious weed. So you're not legally mandated to control it if it's on your land, but you can't move it around. Mm-hmm. So the DNR has made a couple of handouts, especially for buckthorn, because we get a lot of questions about that. And it's a nice handout. It's called Buckthorn, What You Should Know, What You Can Do. And it's linked to a PDF file on our website.
Okay.
Or you can call the DNR and ask for a copy, and they'll mail one out for you. And it's nice because it kind of goes through what you need to know about buckthorn, why it's a problem, outcompeting native plants, degrading wildlife habitat, where it came from. It has pictures of glossy buckthorn and common buckthorn.
What are some common ways to identify like the buckthorn if you have a whole grove of trees in your, in your farmstead or something? How do you determine that it's buckthorn within there?
The best time to look is in the fall, because buckthorn holds on to its leaves much longer than our native plants do. So if your native trees have lost leaves, but yet you still have these bright green trees or shrubs on your land, it's probably buckthorn. So I always think that's the nicest time to look. And this handout is nice too, because it has information on what the leaves look like, dark green leaves. They have pretty distinct looking venation. They have dark black berries on the common buckthorn. So it gives you a little bit to help you identify it, because there are things that look similar to buckthorn. And so before you would go to the effort of cutting something down and herbiciding it, you want to make sure you know what you're doing.
Yeah, one of my college professors always told us to look for like the trident within the veining on the buckthorn leaves.
Yeah,
if it looks
they kind of curve.
Yeah, if it looks kind of like the devil's staff, it's kind of a bad plant, so that would be maybe a way to remember how the veining looks on it, which would be different from like the glossy chokeberries that could be mistaken for it.
Exactly. So then if you do determine that you have buckthorn and you want to get rid of it, if you have smaller plants and you just want to pull them out, there are some different tools you can use. Things like weed wrenches, where you grab on, pull back, and pull the whole tree out by the root. So you've got that option. Or if they're really small, you can pull them out by hand. But if you have a bigger tree, you're going to want to cut it down, and then you have to apply herbicide after you cut it, because otherwise it just suckers right up and you'll just end up with a bushier thing than what you had before.
What kind of herbicide would we use for that?
Yeah, so once you've cut the stump, herbicides containing triclopyr are really the way to go. That's been very effective at killing the plant, preventing it from coming back. And then the other tricky thing is that once you controlled your adult big buckthorn trees, you've got a seed bank of buckthorn seeds, and it can take up to 5 years to deplete a seed bank. So you have to figure that you're going to be going back to do follow-up control. And you can use herbicides like glyphosate to go directly onto those leaves of the seedlings. So it's definitely, unfortunately, not a 1 year and done thing. You need to do some follow-up to deplete that seed bank over time.
And it would probably be very key to make sure you get all of the young ones taken care of before they're mature enough to fruit.
Exactly.
And even from there, you can't, eliminate the risk of birds dropping in more seeds
from around you. So that's why it helps if everybody does their part and can try to, get a hold of their buckthorn, then fewer seeds out and about, because yes, the birds do eat them and spread them all over. But then you get to have the fun part, which is life after buckthorn, where you get to figure out, okay, what do I want to plant in this site? And so this brochure lists some other alternative plantings for buckthorn. So if you want sort of the similar sort of look to it,
wild look.
It gives you some native species that can help sort of be nice shrubs or trees. Things like high bush cranberry, nannyberry, chokecherry, gray dogwood, pagoda dogwood. That's one of my favorites. American hazelnut and black chokeberry. So just to give you a few ideas of things if you want to keep having a nice, shrub there.
I always like the black chokeberry because it gives such a nice fall show. And when you think about, okay, everything's turning nice and colorful in the fall, and then you have this green buckthorn. Not so great. Get some black chokeberry in there, and you've got, your oranges and your reds and your yellows and the whole understory right along with the over, and that's a nice one. I really do personally like that one. Back to the wild parsnip. How would you go about controlling that? How do you identify it? what would be, you know, the best way to make sure you're not mistaking it for something else?
Yeah. So let's start with the identifying it. It's got the umbels, so there's our picture, the umbels there of the carrot family with yellow flowers. And there's the DNR website and other, you know, if you do some Google image searches for wild parsnip, you can find some nice handouts. The other nice tool that the DNR has put out is this Minnesota invasive non-native terrestrial plant handbook. And so the website has pictures of those different species and talks about their threats and control methods. And you can also buy these from the Minnesota bookstore. There's a link there. So this is a nice tool if you're going out and you're not really quite sure what you have and you want to have something with you to compare. That's a good way. But the wild parsnip has the yellow flowers on the umbels, sort of broad leaves, and it does have a rosette stage. So at the beginning it's just having rosette leaves, and then later on it bolts.
Is it kind of like a rhubarb type shaped leaf, or?
No, it's more serrated. Yeah, this picture is pretty small.
Is it this one over here?
It's that one there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's more of a multiple leaflet.
Exactly. Type. Yeah. But then when it bolts, it gets much taller and has those flowers. And right now along the roadsides, you could take a peek. Again, being careful to avoid getting the juice on yourself. But that you can treat wild parsnip with basic glyphosate herbicide. And again, with all these invasive species, you know, trying to do spot sprays where you're just getting the species that you need, not broad herbicide. Just go for the plants that you're trying to get rid of, so the other plants can fill in and hopefully make it harder for that plant to come back.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to completely clear an area and leave it for all the weed seed to come right back up. And as far as, I had a question, but we'll pass the wild parsnip. What can we move on to now? What else are we looking for?
And the other big one I wanted to hit on was garlic mustard, because that is a big deal. It has a lot of negative impacts. One of the impacts it has, there are native butterflies that they lay eggs on a native mustard plant. But garlic mustard has similar chemical cues to that native plant. So they are attracted to the garlic mustard, come to it, lay their eggs on garlic mustard. But then when the eggs hatch, the larvae can't develop on the garlic mustard.
Okay.
So it acts as a population sink. They keep laying their eggs on garlic mustard and the larvae die, so the population can't move forward. So that's a real direct impact on a native species. The other interesting thing that garlic mustard does is it exudes chemicals from its roots, has root exudates that kill our native soil mycorrhizal fungi.
Okay.
And a lot of our native plants are really dependent on mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. So what happens is garlic mustard comes in, kills off this soil fungi. It doesn't need it, so it can do just fine, but the native species have a hard time getting a hold. And so the research that's being done is showing that has a really big impact on tree seedlings that can grow, other native species that can grow. So it's not just that it's pushing other species out, it's that it's making the habitat very unfavorable for other species, and an impact that could go all the way up to what canopy tree species we see in the future. So big impact on garlic mustard. And garlic mustard also has a rosette stage and adult stage. So the rosette stage, the leaves they almost look like Creeping Charlie. It's sort of rounded, but more scallopy. And the trick is, so Creeping Charlie smells like mint, garlic mustard smells like garlic. So when in doubt, crush it, smell it. It'll be pretty distinct one way or the other. And then it, in the second year, it bolts up and has more triangular shaped leaves and little white flowers with four white petals. And Good times to control garlic mustard are late in the fall, where the rosettes are still green, but the native plants have died back, because the rosettes actually stay green all winter long. So you can treat later into the fall, and that's a way to make sure you're not impacting the other species, just getting the garlic mustard. And or you can go very early in the spring when the garlic mustard is out, even before other species.
Is that kind of a common characteristic when it comes to invasives, that they don't adapt as well to our fall, and so you notice them more in the fall because they're staying
Yeah, it
greener?
seems to be the garlic mustard and the buckthorn both have that in common, that they are, actively photosynthesizing longer than our native plants, which is giving them an advantage. They're having more time to grow. Yeah, so with garlic mustard, you can hand pull plants. If you hand pull them, you need to make sure to bag them and send them to a landfill, because it has enough energy still in it that even if you pull the plant, set it down on the ground, it can still set seed. So it's pretty amazing. If it's starting to show seed pods, it can complete those seeds even not being in the ground. And then you can use herbicides like glyphosate to treat garlic mustard.
Do you find that most people maybe don't notice some of these more perennial type plants until after they've already come up and are almost ready to seed, and then they're like, oh no, where did this come from?
Yeah, well the trick is, when they're in flower, that's when they're most noticeable. And a lot of time with invasive species, you don't notice it when it's just entering your area and it's just a plant here, plant there. But then all of a sudden it's everywhere, and you see this big dense hillside of white flowers, and think that wasn't there.
Yeah, that wasn't there
a few years ago. Yeah, so that's often when you really realize what you have. Yeah.
So buckthorn, parsnip, and garlic mustard are kind of the top 3 right now. What other ones could we be watching out for that might, eventually take hold here and become worse?
Yeah. So for things that we don't even have in Minnesota yet, there are a few organizations that work to put together lists of things to give you a heads up, because if something's a problem in Wisconsin, it's probably going to be a problem here. If it's a problem in Michigan or Illinois, there's a good chance it's going to end up being a problem here. So one organization is the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, and they have some neat handouts about keeping a lookout for what kind of plants might come this way. One big one is giant hogweed, and almost picture a wild parsnip with white flowers 10 feet tall.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's just amazingly huge. And it also has that same kind of damaging sap. So that's definitely one that we're keeping an eye out for as far as impacts in the future. Some of the other ones, there's a few teasels, like cut-leaved teasel. That's often used in floral arrangements sometimes. People might be familiar with that. That's still pretty limited spread in Minnesota. Asian bittersweet, that's also pretty limited in its spread right now. Pale swallowwort and black swallowwort, those are ones that we're keeping an eye out for. Japanese hops. No kudzu yet, but everybody knows that one from
down
the
south.
Yeah, so I always think of it, oh, that's a southern plant. It can't be a problem here, but on their distribution maps, it's already in the middle of Iowa, so we definitely don't want that.
Yeah, it's amazing that something that could thrive in such a hot, moist climate could come up here and thrive through our winters and everything too.
So we hope it can't, but if we see one, we're going to pull it and not find out.
Yeah, no kidding.
We'll try to take care of that. Tree of Heaven is another one. So there's some neat lists out there. This is the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. Sometimes different counties pull together and make cooperative weed management areas where people come together to coordinate what weeds they're going to work on. So this is one from Ramsey County, and they also did a Be on the Lookout. So a lot of these are species that are in Minnesota but not really widespread in Ramsey County. So you can do this at all sorts of different levels, what works for your area. And so this one has things like yellow iris, Japanese knotweed, common tansy, hydrilla, miscanthus, wild parsnip, Grecian foxglove, flowering rush, and cut-leaf teasel.
And I notice the foxglove and the iris, there are native varieties of those plants too, aren't there?
There are. So you really want to make sure you know what you have before you start pulling it or or taking it out. Yeah.
And some of them, it seems like they could be very, very difficult to distinguish. Is there any place or anybody like in our area that somebody could talk to and say, hey, I have this stuff that I'm noticing, you know, can you help me figure out what I have and what to do with it? Yeah,
so some good sources are those county ag inspectors that I was talking about. They're very knowledgeable. The University of Minnesota Extension has some resources for helping people figure out what they have. Your local DNR office, you could call with questions there too. So there's a few options out there. Sometimes your Soil and Water Conservation District can help, you know, send you to the right place and connect you up with people who can help. You know, and often people who know plants, you know, garden center people, they might have a good idea what you're looking at too, and they can reassure you that this is a different species or a different variety, or this variety isn't invasive. It's not the one that you think it might be. And a lot of these are tricky species, all these carrot family species, because we've got lots of native ones as well. So getting some help, getting a good book. That can help.
I always thought the Queen Anne's lace was native, but I guess it's not. Because I know we've spent a lot of time, you know, growing up in state parks and stuff and growing up around all these different plants, and it's just interesting to see how things can develop and move throughout an area.
Yeah, very. Yeah, and kind of, you know, you kind of get used to what you see. Yeah, but that helps you learn, you know, to identify stuff. If you're seeing it a lot, at least it's a good chance to learn how to identify it.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else you want to add about control or any particular weeds, or just, you know, find some resources, keep your eyes open?
Those were the big ones I wanted to hit on that. Should we talk about what to plant that, you know, won't get invasive? We could talk about some of the other things.
Well, we're just about done, but if you want to mention maybe just a few to throw out there quick that people can look for.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick plug for a few more other resources you can find through the DNR. Plant some native species. If you plant beautiful, gorgeous prairie species, you'll get butterflies and bees, and provide habitat and soil stabilization. So take a look around and think about planting native species, and then you don't have to worry about whether they're invasive or not.
Very good. And for more information, you can log on to ksmq.org and click on Garden Connections. You can catch past episodes, join the blogs, and tell us about your garden experiences. You can also email the show. The address is garden@ksmq.org. Tune in next week when we'll talk about how you can use the herbs that you have grown in your garden. I'm Amy Whitaker. See you next week.